Well, I wouldn't say that it has undermined completely the work of the committee. What is clear was that compensation was obviously one of the outcomes that people and civil society were looking for and were waiting for, and that hasn't materialized. So there's this distinction between how the legacy fund was going to be used, whether for backward-looking measures, notably compensation, or forward-looking measures, which is to help social policies in a number of areas going forward, which is really what they've done in the announcement they made last week with the legacy fund. I think it has to be put in context what FIFA has done here. This idea of a legacy fund was created during the South Africa World Cup in 2010. Since then, all the financial support that FIFA have given through the legacy funds have been firstly confined to the host country of the World Cup, and secondly confined just to football matters. The Qatar Legacy Fund is truly groundbreaking in the sense that FIFA has abandoned the host country, and the football-only objectives of the fund. And it's devoting the Legacy Fund to social policy issues, which are vitally important, around three main pillars: that of refugees, labour and health, and education. And in each of those pillars, it's working with the relevant international organs, notably the United Nations High Commissioner for Refugees, the World Health Organization, and the World Trade Organization. So this is really groundbreaking, and this has to be welcomed, because I don't know of any sporting association that has given so many funds to social policies around the globe which have nothing to do with the sports that they manage.
Mr. Llamas, some might say that that is a very admirable thing to do, and for an organisation with as much money as FIFA, very welcomed. But that doesn't take away the fact that the independent report was commissioned specifically to look at compensatory measures. The report finds that FIFA has a shared responsibility with the Qatari authorities and the other organisations involved in the loss of lives and the harm and injuries done to workers, to provide compensation measures. Now, FIFA has chosen not to go forward with a recommendation that you yourself supported. Morally, ethically, how does that sit with you, and do you intend to, or have you taken a stand on that decision?
No, the subcommittee has met since the announcement of the Legacy Fund and how it's going to use. We'll be meeting before the end of the year and will clearly be discussing this. I mean, what the human level report, because what you're referring to as well is the human level report, because this objective of compensation comes from the human level report, and then the subcommittee I chair endorsed that and saw that as one very extremely important way of using the legacy fund. That unfortunately has not happened, and of course there's an element of great disappointment about that. Again, I do know that FIFA has looked into this matter. It's not as if they've just brushed it aside, and without giving any justification, which I'm not seeking to do, but looked at it objectively, it's a very, very complex issue to address. Even starting with the numbers, there's no consensus of how many people died in Qatar in relation to the preparation of the World Cup in Qatar. For example, the 6,500 deaths, which I think is a figure that comes from The Guardian, is heavily contested. That seems to include all deaths of non-Qatari people in the 10 years before the organization of the World Cup. The human level report itself says that they don't know. It's very difficult to assess that. You then have to assess the nexus between the death and the World Cup. I mean, the human level report divides the migrant workers into three categories. So at the very top are those migrant workers who were directly involved with the World Cup, like, for example, the construction of a football stadium. And in the third category, you have those workers where the nexus with the World Cup is much more debatable, like, for example, the construction of roads. And all of that has to be put into the pot. They've obviously looked at it and they've taken the decision they've taken.
Well, we can talk further on that, because you could argue that the human level report was not, the purpose of it was not to analyse forensically, each death and who is responsible. It was to take the general view, wasn't it, as to compensation measures for those who did.
Yeah.
But we can't go into that just yet. But I want to ask you yourself on a personal level how you feel having having been responsible for the delivery of this report, Gibraltar's GFA President and Attorney General, your role in this, and we'll sidestep the disappointment that you spoke of for now. How do you feel having participated in this, and what's the future for the subcommittee?
Well, the Qatar report is just one of the activities of this subcommittee. I mean, this subcommittee has a role to analyse everything that FIFA does in the field of social responsibility and human rights. I mean, this is a very big project and has been a very big project. We went to Doha in 2022. We met workers, we met the relevant organizations there. So it's taken up a very big part of our time. And look, we made the recommendation we made. Of course, I would have liked to have seen compensation given, because that is really the most direct way to compensate those who ultimately suffered the most in the construction of the facilities for the World Cup in Qatar.
So, Mr. Llamas, no compensation for those workers or the families of those who lost their lives, but can you at least say that the work that the subcommittee has done in producing this report will prevent, or at least your subcommittee will prevent, as far as it is able to, from further human rights abuses like this from taking part again in the future in a FIFA tournament?
Well, that's a matter for the FIFA administration. Bear in mind that the subcommittee in this context works independently from the FIFA administration. We are there to play a role in advising and supervising the work that FIFA does, and that we will continue to do. Let's also not forget, again, it's worth mentioning that a lot of improvements were made in Qatar, specifically in relation to workers in the build-up to the World Cup. For example, this notorious kafala system, whereby a migrant worker has to deliver their passport to their employer and has no room to move jobs or to leave the country. I mean, that was curtailed. There was new legislation on heat stress, which was one of the biggest issues with all the construction works. And there's been the introduction of a minimum wage in Qatar, which is the only country in the region to have that. So some improvements were made, and that's recognized by Amnesty International itself, who's one of the biggest critics of the Qatar World Cup. So that has been done also on the ground on the specific question of workers in Qatar. And look, this subcommittee, as I've told you, it has a role beyond this, and we will continue to advise FIFA as required.